Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Consequences, Stories by Manuel Muñoz, narrated by Manuel Muñoz. Este librito es para mi mamá, Esmeralda, y para mi papá, Antonio. Sometimes, shutting a book and rising, you can walk off the back porch and into the sea, though it's not the sort of story you tell your mother. Rita Dove, Fantasy and Science Fiction. Anyone can do it. Her immediate concern was money. It was a Friday when the men didn't come home from the fields, and true, sometimes they wouldn't return until late, the headlights of the neighborhood work truck turning the corner, the men drunk and laughing from the bed of the pickup. And true, other women might have thought first about the green immigration vans prowling the fields and the orchards all around the valley, ready to take away the men they might not see again for days if good luck held, or longer if they found no luck at all. When the street fell silent at dusk, the screen doors of the dark houses opened one by one, and the shadows of the women came to sit outside, a vigil on the concrete steps. Delfina was one of them, but her worry was a different sort. She didn't know these women yet, and these women didn't know her. She and her husband and her little boy had been in the neighborhood for only a month, renting a two-room house at the end of the street with a narrow screened-in back porch, a tight bathroom with no insulation, and a mildewed kitchen. There was only a dirt yard for the boy to play in, and they had to drive into the town center to use the payphone to call back to Texas, where Delfina was from. They had been here just long enough for Delfina's husband to be welcomed along to the fieldwork, the pay split among all the neighborhood men, the work truck chugging away from the street before the sun even rose. When Delfina saw the first silhouette rise into feet, she thought of the private turmoil these other women felt in the absence of their men, and she knew that her own house held none of that. Just days before the end of June, with the rent due soon, she thought that all the women on the front steps might believe that nothing could be any different until the men returned, that nothing could change until they arrived back from wherever they had been taken. She knew the gravity of her worry, to be sure, but she felt a resolve that seemed absent in the women, putting out last cigarettes and retreating behind the screen doors. She watched as the street went dark past sundown and the neighborhood children were sent inside to bed. The longer she held her place on her front steps, the stronger she felt. From the far end of the street, one of the women emerged from a porch, and Delfina saw her walk toward her house, guided by a few dim porch lights and the wan blur of television sets glowing through the windows. When the woman, tall and slender, arrived at her front yard, Delfina could make out the long sleeves of a husband's work shirt and wisps of hair falling from her neighbor's bun. "Buenas tardes," the woman said. "Buenas tardes," Delfina answered, and rather than invite her forward, she rose from the steps and met her at the edge of the yard. "Sometimes they don't come back right away," the neighbor said in Spanish. "But don't worry, they'll come back soon. All of them. If they take them together, they come back together." The woman extended her hand. "Me llamo Liz," she said. "Delfina," she answered, and as Liz emerged fully out of the street shadow, Delfina saw a face about the same age as hers. "Your house was empty for nearly 3 months," said Liz, "before you arrived. That's a long time around here, even for our neighborhood. Everything costs so much these days." "It does," Delfina agreed. "Was it expensive in Texas?" Liz asked. "Is that why you moved?" Delfina looked at her placidly, betraying nothing. She had not told this woman that she was from Texas, and she began to wonder what her husband might have said to the other men in the work truck, or in the parking lot of the little corner store near Gold Street where the owner said nothing about the men's loitering as long as they kept buying beer after a day in the fields. "Your car," Lise said, pointing to the Ford Galaxy parked on the dirt yard. "I noticed the Texas license plates when you first came." "We drove it from Texas," Delfina answered. "You're lucky your husband didn't take that car to the fields. They impound them, and it's tough to get them back." The woman reminded Delfina of her sister back in Texas, who had always tried to talk her into things she didn't want to do. It was her sister who had told her that moving to California was a bad idea, and who had repeated terrible stories about the people who lived there, though she had never been there herself. Her sister had given all the possible reasons why she should stay, except for the true one, that she had not wanted to be left alone with their mother. "My husband says they stop you if you don't have California plates," Delfina said, "so I try not to drive the car unless I have to." On the long drive from Texas, she had learned that strangers only introduced themselves when they needed something. She could refuse Lise money if she asked, but it would be hard to deny her a ride into town if she needed it. Even in the dark, she could tell that Lise was coming up with a response. She had turned her head to look at the galaxy, her face back in shadow under the streetlight. "Gas is expensive," Lise said, drawn out and final, as if she had realized that whatever she had wanted to request was no longer worth asking about. But she kept looking at the car and said nothing more, which only convinced Delfina that she would, in time, come out with it. "We got our work truck very cheap before the gas lines started, and we didn't realize how much it would take to keep it filled up. Did you have to stand in line for gas in Texas?" "We did," said Delfina. "It was like that everywhere, I heard." "Not everywhere," said Lise. "They tell me that Mexico is okay again, but family will always tell you whatever they need to get you home." "Where are you from?" "Guanajuato." "And you?" "From Texas," said Delfina. "Where we drove from," she added, as if to remind her. Lisa's face had fallen back into shadow, making it hard to see if she was pressing her lips into a vague smile about the fact that Delfina's husband had been rounded up with the rest of them. "I think the old man who used to live in your house a long time ago was from Texas, from the Matamoros side," she said. "Or Durango. He lived here so long he said that this street used to be the real edge of town, and that it backed up to a grape vineyard." "Is that right?" "He passed away a while back, but he was too old to work by then. He always said he wished he could go back to Mexico because he was all alone. Pobrecito. Sometimes I think he had the right idea. It's a terrible thing to be alone." If she knew this woman better, if this woman knew her better, Delfina thought, she would tell her that this was only half true, that it was hard to make a go of it alone, but that it could be just as hard to live in a house without kindness. "But then you two came, with your niño. How old is he?" "He is 4. "So little," said Lise. "How sweet. My girl is a little older, 10. "I think I've seen her before," said Delfina, though she didn't remember. "Children never understand the circumstances," said Lise. "No, they don't," said Delfina. "I don't think they should ever learn that." "It's part of life," said Lise. "Ni modo. You know that old man, I think he would have liked what we were doing with the work truck. All of us going together, as many people as we could load in the back. He always said people were better neighbors in Mexico." "The Texas side?" "Claro," said Lise, half smiling. "Listen, our rent is due on the 1st, she said. Yours too, no?" Delfina didn't want to say yes, not even in the dark, but only no would mean this wasn't true. Lise looked over at the galaxy. "I learned something the last time this happened, that I had to keep working instead of waiting. It's not good to run low on money." Delfina could hear Lisa's voice press in the same way her sisters used to. Her sister who talked and talked, who thought that the more you talked, the more convincing you sounded. Her husband had said that anyone who asked too hard about anything really wanted something else. What would you say about taking the car out to the peach orchards and splitting what we get? I'd pay for half the gas. Oh, I don't know, Delfina began. My girl is old enough to care for your niño, if you trust her, Lise offered. It could be just us, she said, if you don't want to bring along anyone else in the neighborhood. I don't know, Delfina hesitated, though she knew she could not say that more than twice, and she steeled herself to say no. I know the farmer, said Lise. We could go out to the orchards and pick up a few rows before he gives all that work away. I'll have to think about it, said Delfina. My husband doesn't like me driving the car. She remembered what her neighbor had said about impoundment, and she tried that. If they take the car... You're from Texas, said Lise, but she pressed no further. Her face was clear and open, but the way she said these words stung, as if being from one side or the other meant anything about how easy or hard things could be. It was none of any stranger's business, but Delfina's husband had never allowed her to work, and she knew what women like Lise thought about women like her. I don't know the first thing about working in the fields anyway, Delfina said. She tried to say it in a way that meant it was the truth, and not at all a reply to what Lise had said about Texas. It's easy but hard at the same time, said Lise. Anyone can do it. It's just that no one really wants to. I'll have to think about it, said Delfina. I understand, Lise answered, and backed a step out to the street, her arms folded in a way that Delfina recognized from her sister, the way she had stood on the Texas porch in defeat and resignation. Que pases buenas noches, Lise said, and began walking away before Delfina had a chance to reply in kind. When she did, she felt her voice carry along the street as if everyone else on the block had overheard this refusal, and she went back into the house with an unexpected sense of shame. Very early the next morning, after a restless night, Delfina woke her little boy from the pallet of blankets on the living room floor. We're going into town, she told him, when Kiki resisted her with grogginess as she struggled to get him dressed. She was about to lead him to the car when she pictured herself driving past Lisa's house, how that would look to a woman she had just refused, and her pride took over. She grasped Kiki's hand in her own with such ferocity that he knew she meant business, and he walked quickly beside her down the street and around the corner, past the little white church, empty on a Saturday morning, and toward town. The boy kept pace with her somehow, and to her surprise, he made no more protests, and 20 minutes later, when they reached the TG&Y, she deposited Kiki in the toy aisle without saying a word and marched to the payphone at the back of the store to call her mother in Texas. He left you, her mother's voice said over the line. Nothing keeps a good father from his family. They took other men in the neighborhood too, Delfina said. He wasn't alone. How many times did he go out to work here in Texas and he came home just fine? I told you that you shouldn't have gone. Your sister was absolutely right. Delfina pulled the phone away from her ear, and the vague hectoring of her mother barely rippled out along the bolts of fabric and the sewing notions hanging on the back wall of the store. Delfina gripped the remaining dimes in her hands, slick and damp in her palm, and clicked one of them into the phone, the sound cutting out for a moment as the coin went through. How's the niño? Is he dreaming about his father yet? That's how you'll know if he's coming back or not. Did you hear that? She interrupted her mother, dropping another coin. I don't have much time left. Why are you calling? For money? Of course you're calling for money. If he's a good father, he'll find a way to send some if he can't get back. If you were a good mother, Delfina began, but it came as hardly even a whisper, and she lacked the courage to talk back this way, to summon the memory of her white-haired father who had died years ago and taken with him, it seemed, any criticism of his own late-night ways. Her voice was lost anyway as her mother yelled out to turn the phone over to Delfina's sister, and in the moment when the exchange left them all suspended in static, Delfina hung up the receiver. She had not even given them the address for the Western Union office, and she would have to apologize, she knew, when the worst of the financial troubles would be upon her. But for the moment, she relished how she had left her older sister calling into the phone, staring back incredulous at her mother. "Come along," she said to Kiki, when she went to collect him from the toy aisle, where he had quietly scattered the pieces of a board game without the notice of the clerk. He started to cry out in protest now that he was in the cool and quiet of the 5 and dime, and she was pulling him away from the bins of marbles and plastic army men. Delfina imagined the footsteps of the clerk coming to check on the commotion, and, in her hurry to shove the board game back onto the shelf, she let slip the payphone dimes, Kiki frozen in surprise by their clatter before he stooped to pick them up. "Come along," she said again, letting him have the dimes. "Ice cream," she whispered in encouragement, and led on by this suggestion, he followed her out of the store. Kiki fell meek and quiet once again, as if he knew not to jeopardize his sudden fortune. It was only right to reward him with the promised treat, and she led him down the street to the drugstore with its ice cream counter visible from the large front window. It was only 10 in the morning, and the young woman at the main register had to come around to serve them 2 single scoops, but Delfina didn't even take the money from Kiki's hands to pay for it. She had a single folded dollar bill in her pocket, and she handed it to the clerk. Foolish, she thought, to be spending so frivolously. But her boy didn't need to know those troubles. His Saturday was coming along like any other, his father sometimes not home at sundown and always gone at sunrise. There was no reason to get him wondering about things he wasn't yet wondering about. Delfina led him to the little park across the street from the town bank. He gripped his cone tightly, and his other hand held the fist of dimes. She motioned him to pocket the change for safekeeping. "Put it away," she said, sitting on one of the benches. But her little boy kept them in his grip, and so she patted his pocket more firmly to encourage him, and that's when she felt it, a hard little object that she knew instantly was something he had stolen from the toy aisle. "Let me see," she said, "or I will take away your coins." Kiki struggled against her, smearing some of the ice cream on his pants, which finally distressed him enough into actual tears. "Ya, Delfina said, calming him, and fished out what was in his pocket, a little green car, metal and surprisingly heavy. Her little boy was inconsolable, and the Saturday shoppers along the sidewalk stopped to look in their direction. "Shh," she told him, there, and took the time to show him the car in the palm of her hand before she slipped it back into his pocket. Ya, she said one more time, and leaned back on the bench, the Saturday morning going by. Later, when they rounded the corner back into the neighborhood, she saw Lise out in her dirt yard. She was tending to a small bed of wild sunflowers, weeding around them with a hoe, her back turned to the street. The closer they got to Lisa's yard, the harder the scuffling of Kiki's shoes became, and Lise turned around toward the noise. "Buenos dias," Delfina greeted her. She wanted to keep walking, but Lise made her way toward her, and she knew she would have to stop and listen, much like the time in Arizona on the trip out here, when she had accidentally locked eyes with a man at a gas station, and he had walked over to rap on the window of the Galaxy and beg for some change. "Good thing we didn't go to the orchards after all," said Lise. "I would have felt terrible if your car had stalled out there." "No," Delfina began. The more she stumbled, the less it made sense to make up any story at all. There was no reason to be anything but honest. "The car is fine," she said. "I just wanted him to walk a bit. We got ice cream." "For breakfast," Lise said, looking down at Kiki and smiling. "What a Saturday!" The morning sweat matted her hair down on her forehead, and she wore no gloves, her fingers a bit raw from the metal handle of the hoe, but she was cheerful with Kiki, recognizing his exhaustion. Her daughter, Delfina realized, was not out helping her, but inside the cool of the house, and she took this as a sign of the same propensity for sacrifice that she believed herself to hold. "I thought about it," Delfina said, though she really hadn't. "I think it's a good idea." "I'm glad," said Lise. "I wish I had said so last night. We could have put in a day's work, but I'm happy to go tomorrow." "Tomorrow's Sunday," said Lise, and when Delfina put her hand up to her mouth as if she'd forgotten, as if she might change her mind, Lise moved even closer to her, looking down at Kiki. "But work never waits," she said. "El día de Dios," said Delfina. "I didn't even think of it." "People work," said Lise. "Don't worry about it. We can wait until Monday. That way the children can be at school. Like I told you, my daughter is old enough to watch him if you trust her. I leave her alone sometimes, or we can bring them out with us and stay longer." Delfina could make out the shadow of a child watching from behind the screen door, and catching her glance past her shoulder, Lise turned to look. She called her forth, and her daughter stepped out, a girl very tall for 10 years old. "This is our neighbor," Lise explained, "and we'll need you to watch her little boy tomorrow. Will you do that?" The girl nodded, and she stuck out her hand to Delfina in awkward politeness. "What's your name?" Delfina asked. "Irma," the girl said, very quietly, her voice deferential. She had small eyes as she squinted as if in embarrassment, and Delfina wondered if she knew she needed glasses, but was too afraid to say. "We can trust you, can't we?" said Lise, "to take care of the little boy. If I leave you some food, you can feed him, can't you?" "Oh, I can leave them something," Delfina said. "Don't worry," said Lise. "I can leave something easy to fix, and you can bring out something for us in the orchard. I have a little ice chest to keep everything out of the sun." After Delfina nodded her head in agreement, Lise made as if to go back to her yard work. "At dawn, then," Lise said. "I'll bring everything we need." For the rest of the day, Delfina was restless, anxious that every noise on the street might signal the return of the men. To have them come back would mean the lull of normalcy, of what had been and would continue to be, just when she was on the brink of doing something truly on her own. But the street stayed quiet. The afternoon heat swallowed the houses, and by evening some of the shadows resumed their evening watch, sitting stiffly but without much hope or expectation. They turned back in before night had fully come, and Delfina went to bed early too. At dawn, she roused Kiki from the blankets strewn on the living room floor and poured him some cereal. He blinked against the harshness of the kitchen light at such an early hour, surprised at his mother wearing one of his father's long-sleeved work shirts, and even more surprised by the knock at the door. Lise stood there, her daughter behind her. "Buenos dias," Delfina said, and waved the girl Irma inside. She poured her a bowl of cereal too, and Irma sat quietly at the table without having to be told to do so. "Thank you for taking care of him," Delfina said. "We'll be back in the middle of the afternoon." She knew she didn't have to say more than that, trusted that Lise had spoken with the same motherly sense of warning that she used. Still, it was only now, on the brink of leaving them alone for the day, that she wished she had asked Kiki if he had been dreaming about his father, if he might have communicated something about what was true for him while he slept. Lise showed her the gloves and the work knives, and then the 2 costales to hold the fruit, a sturdy one of thick canvas with a hardy shoulder strap, and a smaller one of nylon mesh. Her other hand balanced a water jug and a small ice chest, where Delfina put in a bundle of foil-wrapped bean tacos that would keep through the heat of the day. In the car, Lise pointed her south of town and toward the orchards, and Delfina drove along. They kept going south, the orchards endless, cars parked over on the side of the road, and pickers approaching foreman, work already getting started even though the dawn's light hadn't yet seeped into the trees. Up there, Lee said, where a few cars had already lined up, and several workers had gathered around a man sitting on the open tailgate of his work truck. Wait here, she said. Before Delfina could ask why, Lise had exited, approaching the man with a handshake. He seemed to recognize her and then looked back at Delfina in the car. Lise finished what she needed to say, and the man took one more look at Delfina and then pointed down the rows. Lise motioned her to get out of the car. He says he'll give us 2 rows for now, and we do what we can. If we're fast, he'll give us more, and he's letting us use a ladder free of charge. That's kind of him. They charge sometimes, Lise said. She took one end of a heavy-looking wooden ladder, the tripod hinge rusty, and the rungs worn smooth in the middle. So 50-50? Half and half, Delfina agreed. I can pick the tops and you can do the bottoms if you're afraid of heights. Or you can walk the costales back to the crates for weighing. Give them your name if you want to, but make sure the foreman tells you exactly how much we brought in. They worked quickly, the morning still cool. Delfina parted the leaves where the peaches sat golden among the boughs, and the work felt easy at first. The fruit came down with scarcely more than a tug, and when she yanked hard enough to rustle the branches, Lise spoke her advice from the ladder above. Just the redder ones and not too hard. Feel them, she said. If they're too hard, leave them. Someone else will come back around in a few days, and they'll be riper then. They did a few rounds like this, Delfina taking the costales back to the road to have them weighed. Sometimes Lise was ready with the smaller nylon sack, and sometimes Delfina had to wait for other pickers to have their fruit accounted for. The morning moved on, a brighter white light coming into the orchard as they got closer to noon. As they picked the trees near clean, they moved deeper and deeper into the orchard, and the walk back to the crates took longer. Lise almost lost to her among the leaves. They had not quite finished the row when the sun finally peaked directly overhead, and their end of the orchard sank into quiet. Delfina let out a sigh upon her return. I should have brought the ice chest while I was there. I can get it, said Lise. You've walked enough. She came down with the half-empty nylon costal and pulled a few more peaches from the bottom boughs while Delfina rested. She started walking toward the road, then turned around. The keys, she said, and held out her hand. Delfina watched her go. Lise walked quickly with the nylon costal dangling over her shoulder. Maybe the weight of Lisa's work was all in her arms from stretching and pulling, and not heavy and burning in the thighs like hers. Delfina took a peach for herself, the plumpest she could reach without stretching, and sat in the higher bank of the orchard row, catching her breath, massaging her upper legs, and resting. It was a Sunday, she remembered, and Lise had been right after all. People did work on this day, even if it felt as tranquil and lonely as Sundays always did, here among the trees, with the leaves growing more and more still, the orchard quiet, and then quieter. Sundays were always so peaceful, Delfina thought, no matter where you were. So serene, she imagined the birds themselves had gone dumb. El Día de Dios, she thought, and remembered Sundays when her white-haired father had not yet slept out the drunkenness of the previous night. Her own husband had sometimes broken the sacredness of a Sunday silence, and she was oddly thankful for the calm of this orchard moment that had been brought on only by his absence. Delfina ate the last bits of her peach and tossed the pit into the dirt, looking down the row to soak in that blessed quiet. The longer she looked, the emptier and emptier it became. The empty row where, she realized, Lise had disappeared like a faraway star. She started back toward the road. The walk was long, and she couldn't hear a sound, Not of the other workers, not other cars rumbling past the orchards, just the endless trees and her feet against the heavy dirt of the fields. The day's weariness slowed her and made the trees impossible to count, but she walked on.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?